Welcome to the Steelman Podcast, where we take a 15-minute look at a news story and try to have an honest conversation about it. We're the Steelmen. My name is Will, and with me is Jay. Say hi, Jay.
How you doing, Will?
Jay, did you know that the Jews orchestrated the Holocaust and barely killed 2 million people?
I thought the Holocaust was that Jewish holiday they celebrate around Christmas.
Today, we will be looking at an article reporting on a study that supposedly demonstrates Americans are absurdly ignorant of some basic facts on the Holocaust. It comes from The Guardian by a Harriet Sherwood, and I actually did some research on this author, and she writes about the Holocaust a lot. So I think it's just one of her things that she focuses on a lot.
Fun.
And the title of the article is Nearly 2/3 of U.S. young adults are unaware that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust.
How is this possible, Will?
I don't know. The article pretty much says that nearly half of 18 to 29-year-olds don't know basic facts about the Holocaust, such as who was responsible, how many millions of Jews were killed, or some of them haven't even heard of the Holocaust. 48% of people couldn't even name Auschwitz, basically. So it just goes through and names some stats. And I guess today we're going to talk about how important is it to know these facts, like these basic facts, I would say. And is this a reflection of possibly our public school system? So what do you think? Do you think it's important for us to know some of these basic facts about the Holocaust?
Well, I would actually go so far as to say that if anything in all of human history at this point screams, remember me, it's the freaking Holocaust. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a connection. Like when you go through something terrible, it teaches you how to avoid it again. So if we lose, the longer time goes on where something terrible doesn't happen and we forget, the more likely we're just going to walk into something terrible again, it seems to me. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think it's important to obviously know about the Holocaust. It's almost like it's hard to not know about the Holocaust, really. It's something, at least in the US, and I'm sure in Europe especially, you're not going to go through any class and not hear about it. But I do think that it's kind of pedantic to complain about people knowing the exact amount of people who were killed. So the article talks about that a significant amount of people thought 2 million Jews were killed versus the fact that 6 million Jews were killed. And I don't know. I feel like 2 million Jews dying is a lot of people dying, and 6 million Jews dying is a lot of people dying. And I'm not entirely sure there's any significant reason for somebody to be shamed for not knowing the difference in numbers. And even when we talk about the 6 million Jews dying, I mean, I'm sure it was like 6,432,622 Jews died. And
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a large number. And what's important, I think, is that somebody knows that a large number of Jews were murdered.
Right. But then, well, exactly what is large? I mean, at what cutoff point would we say, well, the Holocaust wasn't so bad, right? Is it less than 1 million? Is it less than 500,000? Less than 100,000? The number is important in scale. You know, if you add a zero onto things, we can start really imagining how significant they are.
Yeah, but I don't think the article was claiming that the people were using this as an excuse to say it wasn't a big deal. As far as I can read from the study, it's just people had a misconception about the 2 versus the 6. It's strange to me that people don't know, because 6 million Jews being killed is just something that you could have asked me at any point, and that's the number I would have given, and I wouldn't be 100% sure if that was true. Like, it could have been 7 million. I don't know.
Well, hey, Will, I mean, did you see the Holocaust happen? Did you see 6 million Jews get murdered? Well, hey, look, actually, I do have a question about how they did this survey. Like, we know it was 18 and 39-year-olds. and there are stats on the states, right? So we know it was countrywide, but I couldn't find their methodology. But I have to wonder, who could these be? Specific people who, in the way they asked the question or how they gathered these people, that the sample is bad, right? It could be that if you really if you did a complete sample, maybe those numbers wouldn't look so awful. But it almost seems like they went into a Walmart parking lot, and like everyone that walked out with a case of Milwaukee's Best, that's the people they'd ask, which are the people least likely to be educated on something like the Holocaust. I don't know. So I want to know who they asked. I would also want to know, what do the numbers look like if you narrow it down to like 18 to 24-year-olds? Because 18 to 39-year-olds, the younger you are, the least likely you would be to have heard about anything, right?
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking, not so much the age difference, but I'm interested in the 12% who have never heard of the Holocaust. And I can imagine maybe how many people that were surveyed were maybe new immigrants to the country that maybe came from, I don't know, like Sri Lanka or Angola or some other countries that maybe most Americans aren't familiar with, where it's not going to be a European centric history that's being taught. And is that amount of people make up 12% of the American population, and maybe explains why they never heard of it? Because I don't think that if you asked 100 Milwaukee's best Walmart walking customers out if they've ever heard the Holocaust, I don't think 12% of those people would say, I've never heard of it. I think they all went to public schools. They've definitely heard of it.
Well, then you have to ask, well, maybe they would say they've heard of it, but it's just a word. I mean, it's a word thrown around. If you've simply heard of something, doesn't mean that you actually know what it was. So there was one other part that I found particularly troubling, which is the 7 out of 10 who think it's not acceptable to hold neo Nazi views, meaning, apparently, 3 out of 10 people, they don't think we should get rid of all the Jews, but what? They understand the impulse? How do 3 out of 10 people think it's acceptable to be a neo Nazi? So, I mean, I just wonder what they think a neo Nazi is.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your question about what were the exact questions they asked and what their methodology was. Because I could think of a couple reasons why it was answered that way. It could have been that 3 out of 10 people are actually neo Nazis, or it could have been maybe there was some kind of like classical liberal thinkers that were saying, maybe the question was like, do you think it's okay for people to hold those views in our society? And if you're a liberal thinker, you might say, well, yeah, it's okay to hold those views. I don't think there should be a crime against it. So it does depend on the question.
Yeah, I agree. It is kind of telling. In the Guardian article, they left out a reference to the methodology. It could be that someone was going for this sort of result, that they asked the questions to the right people in the right way to inflate these numbers of people who don't know about such things. That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I can see somebody having the incentive to do that. So,
Well, we're talking
but I
about it.
still think
It
it
gets
does.
clicks.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it does. I think it does say something about possibly our education system. Like if we just take for granted that all the questions were pretty much face value questions, like "Have you heard of the Holocaust?" Or or things like that, then maybe it says something about our public school system. And I don't know, what were your thoughts on that? Do you think that this is a sign that the public school system has failed Americans, or do you think it's just some other reason why people don't know these facts?
If we trust the study, I mean, you have to wonder, you have to think there is something a little bit wrong with, especially the not knowing about it. Like you said, exact numbers. I mean, come on, most of us don't remember exact numbers or dates of anything. Knowing it's in the millions is probably a good thing to know. People, in some sense, are victims to their society. It's not maybe not just the schools, but it's also just what people talk about on a regular basis. But even there, still, I thought we talked about the Holocaust quite a bit. I mean, how often is Hitler brought up in internet discussions? But yeah, so I do think history should be more important. Now, this is just my prejudice, I guess, based on what I've found useful. But it's also, I'm going to be a little biased because it's more what I find interesting. But as far as a nation trying to figure out what should its young people know, I mean, what should every adult know about when they reach adulthood? And to me, knowing how to do trig or knowing how to dissect a frog or being able to summarize the plot of The Great Gatsby seem far less important than understanding events in history. Don't you think?
Yeah, well, I think the important thing to know here is that you shouldn't, as a nation, commit genocide. So, I mean, I know that's pretty obvious, but whether that lesson comes from you knowing a lot of facts about the Holocaust, or you know nothing about the Holocaust, but you actually know a lot about the Armenian genocide in Turkey, I mean, I don't think it really matters to me that you are maybe ignorant of some basic facts about the Holocaust, as long as you know that you shouldn't kill a bunch of people just because of what race they are.
Right. And well, an understanding too that this sort of thing is possible. I think there is an aspect to it where for the longest time, everyone like if in the 60s through the 70s, 80s, um, everyone could relate personally to World War II and the Holocaust happening. And the further we get away from it, doesn't it change the general, like how seriously we take one thing or another, or the attitude about how possible it is for horrific atrocities to happen? I mean, don't you feel like young people today, because they're so disconnected from terrible things, we're way oversensitive to things that aren't terrible at all? And I don't know, I feel like this sometimes too, that so few bad things happen in my life that I tend to not take things way too seriously that really aren't all that bad, and that the most important thing humanity can do for itself is protect itself from truly bad things. And that eventually we're going to stumble into one of these terrible situations because we thought some other thing was more important. I don't know. Does that make any
But you don't.
sense?
I want to push back on the idea that not knowing these facts will lead to another Holocaust. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me in the sense that there have been other genocides that have existed, that have happened, I mean, since the Holocaust. And I think as a global phenomenon, people knew about it. So it seems like you're doomed to repeat history even if you know about the history. It doesn't seem like knowing the history prevents these things from happening. So I guess it just comes back down to, is it really critical to know basic facts about the Holocaust? And whose fault is it that we don't know as much?
Let me just try to steel man the position that this is a problem that the country needs to address. So it's true that knowing specific dates, facts, numbers in history really doesn't matter to just our overall understanding of what events led to other events. But some things are so bad that we should be pounding in certain facts into young people's heads. Anything we can possibly do to try to get history not to repeat itself in the worst possible ways, we should just do them. Uh, that's our best chance at avoiding repeating history, is to know as much as we can about it. So even if we can't guarantee it, this study gives us an indication that not enough people know about the worst event in human history, and by hell or high water, we should at least try to educate people on terrible things like the Holocaust as much as possible, even in the off chance that it helps prevent something similar in the future.
Well, I think that was pretty good. Do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, actually.
Well, we're out of time.